and you've started to implement some of those boundaries, ensure that you are creating time for yourself in your busy life every single day, every single week, whether it is 5 minutes with a morning coffee or 5 minutes sat outside with your feet on the ground, whether it's an hour-long soak in a gorgeous bubble bath or, a gorgeous walk. Time to reflect, time to journal, start to create that time for yourself, because the more breaks that you can take, the more that you can connect to yourself, the more productive, the more positive, the more successful you will be, the more you will continue to connect with yourself, and the further you step away from burnout. So yeah, who are you? What boundaries do you need to implement? And what time can you create for yourself each week?
Hey friends, it's Mary, and this is the Mary Jervich Show, a podcast that champions today's working women to gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to up-level your career while strengthening your faith and living your dream life, all in record time. We'll cover topics like career advancement, leadership, personal development, faith, and health and wellness, so you can intentionally create a career and life full of more abundance, joy, and love. Let's get started.
Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Mary Jervich Show. Today we have a powerhouse guest joining us. You are going to just enjoy hearing her vulnerability, her authentic story, and the actionable takeaways. Today, what we are going to be talking about is gender burnout. And maybe you've never heard of that before. I didn't even really hear of gender burnout until recently. And I love the way that Kelly talks about this. So during today's message, you're going to get to hear more about her story, more about burnout and why we're facing it and what it really looks like. Because one of the things that I really have discovered in life is that a lot of times we don't even realize when things aren't going so good for us. And we're actually closer to burnout, closer to overwhelm than we even really think or know, because we don't know what the warning signs are. And so today, Kelly and I dive deep into this topic of burnout. But this is not like any of the other burnout messages that we have had. This one is specifically talking about some of the gender stuff. We do dive into it a little bit. Why do men face it a little bit differently than women? And you are going to want to hear what Kelly has to say about that, because it seems it might not be too far off from how men are really feeling overwhelmed. Well, before we bring her in, let me just tell you about Kelly. Kelly is the coach for leaders who are done with being exhausted, overworked, and on the brink of burnout. Her clients hire her to help them regain control of their busy lives so that they have more time and energy for the things that matter. What Kelly came to realize after her burnout is that the way we are working isn't working, and how we are taught to define success, well, it's outdated. When we live and lead from our core, we can enjoy being successful on our terms and in our own way. Today, Kelly helps leaders all over the world to succeed without giving up their career or jeopardizing their well-being, because she learned that leading from the core is the key to our success. Kelly, welcome to the show. So excited to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Mary. I'm excited to see where the conversation goes.
Yes, well, I know we're going to have an incredible conversation today. Just from the time I've had to get to know you, you just have such this wonderful energy and light about you. And oh my gosh, your story. We have to just hear your story. So why don't we get started with that, Kelly? Why don't you tell us about your burnout experience?
Okay, so I suppose like many of your listeners, maybe actually, I was I call myself a high-performing, overachieving, recovering perfectionist. But I think I had spent most of my corporate life really just pushing hard, right? Feeling like I needed to prove myself. I had many career promotions, many promotions over an 8-year period. Actually, I had 7 different promotions to get me to the job that ultimately caused my burnout. But I had always been the youngest in a lot of my roles. I had many times been the only female, the only woman at my level. And I think I thought that every time I got the next promotion, I had to work harder, I had to work longer, I had to deal with more stress, that somehow it was my responsibility to fix the entire organization and everything that was going wrong in it. it as my role in HR. And I got to the position, I was actually headhunted for the position of HR director. And on the very first day in this new company, my gut feel was telling me that I needed to get out of this organization. And I ignored it, right? I thought this is just first day nerves. 6 months later, I've still got this niggle that is saying to me, you have to get out of here. You have to get out of here. But I think by then it was quite a toxic organization. And I think I had begun to step away from myself. And I think what I say very, very often now to lots of clients, particularly to women, I think when we're in organizations that cause us to step away from who we are at our core, the bigger the gap we leave for burnout to fill. And so 2 years into this role, after a really awful 6 months and trying to battle for the exec team to be more moral and more ethical in their whole approach to everything with people, I'd gone back into work in January 2013 after a Christmas break. By the lunchtime of the first day back, I was in literally agonizing, crippling pain. Didn't think anything of it. And ego had taken over, right? I'm in there. I can do this. I'm absolutely fine. I can carry on. So I carried on. I'd gone back in the following day and the pain had worsened. I'd gone back in on the Friday. The pain had worsened. And I'd actually, on the train on the way home, I was commuting for about an hour and a half every day to get to the office in London. And I'd passed out on the train on the way home, gone into the kind of bathroom on the train, hit my head on the sink. And that became 7 months of hospitalization, excruciating pain. I kind of liken myself. If anybody is a fan of Friends, the TV series, there's one where Janice asks what would be different if you'd have all have taken a different life. And there's Phoebe in her power suit because, she's had a heart attack. She's in the hospital and she's on her mobile phone and typing away on her laptop, smoking in the bathroom of the hospital. Like that was me. And somehow I proudly owned that for 7 months, right? And I'm still working from my hospital bed. I'm still doing this. I'm still doing this. I'm still doing this. And I ended up having to have 2 operations in 48 hours at 2 different hospitals for 2 different health conditions in July 2013. And it wasn't until I'd gone back to see both medical consultants for my checkup after these operations that they both mentioned burnout to me. And they were talking about stress levels. And I can remember saying, I'm not stressed. Like, what's wrong with you? But it was as part of that recovery process that I think I was gauging my success and gauging my health on whether I was still able to work or not. And I'd had one day as part of my recovery, my sons came home from school. I think I must have looked awful. I'd been watching kind of mind-numbing chat show TV all day on the sofa, trying to recover from these operations. And my sons walked in the door from school, took one look at me, and I could see this worried look on their faces. And my response to them was like, don't worry, mum's going to be okay. And I'm going to be back at work soon. Like, being back at work was the gauge of my success and my health and all of those things. I have twin sons and they kind of looked at each other. They sat on the coffee table in front of me. And one of them said to me, but mum, we don't want you to go back to work because your job is killing you. I was like, wow. Right? This kind of gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching comment. My 12-year-old sons have been able to see something that I had missed. And I recognized at that point that something had to change. And I looked at the issues within the organization and I decided that I was going back to work as my true and honest, authentic, core-led self. Like the toxic environment was not going to take me away from who I am anymore. And the environment was just not somewhere that I could stay, going back into it with fresh eyes. And I lasted about 3 months. I then left to start my own people consultancy. And 3 months after I'd left, I got a phone call to say that my replacement had died in her sleep whilst away at a leadership residential. And that really caused me to spiral. And at that point, bearing in mind I'd been within this organization for 2 years, I then learned that the 3 previous HR directors, even before I started, had all left with really serious health conditions. And I went on this quest to understand what was causing burnout, what was causing high stress, what was it in this environment that had kind of caused it. I did research on organizational change and development and toxic workplaces. And I was studying neuroscience and stress and hypnotherapy and psychotherapy and empowerment techniques. And I really threw myself into how could I stop and how could I help other people to identify what was causing burnout, to stop them getting to that point. And then in 2015, I burned out for a second time. having started my own business. And at that point realized that whilst I think I had physically allowed myself to recover from my first burnout, I hadn't fully allowed myself to heal. I hadn't really done the deep inner work that was needed. I hadn't done the full reflective time. I hadn't really tried to identify why this innate need for me to keep pushing and proving and really not trusting myself or not believing in my worth, why that had allowed me to get to burnout for a second time. And so burnout number 2 was really the pinnacle and the turning point for a lot of kind of big life changes and the start of lots and lots of really deep inner work. And I think, over the last 8 or 9 years now, I've really been continuing with that work and then also helping my clients to do that deep inner work so that ideally, my goal is to prevent burnout completely. But I also understand that the closer we get to burnout, the less we realize that we're in it and the less committed we are to change. So my focus, a lot of my focus now is on helping people to recover from the burnout, to really connect with their true self as they come out of that recovery process, and to create a life that is, that fulfills them, that's full of joy, that is, helping them to redefine success rather than anybody else telling them what success looks like. So really helping them to create that and connect to that, and hopefully then creating bigger ripples in all areas of their life so that they can not get to burnout kind of 2.0 and break the burnout cycle.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kelly, for sharing your story and just sharing it in such a vulnerable way. There were a lot of hard moments in there, a lot of moments that, you had to think. And this is the thing, when we're on these journeys in our lives, and this is what I love about God, he tells us, right, I'm not going to waste anything. Mm-hmm. And so even when we're going through these hard times, and I love how it's like, your mess is now your message. Yeah. The things that you went through, your struggles, the pain and you can see it more clearly, right? Because you've been through it. Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes I think we have to go through these things so we can help others prevent, right? Yes. Or help them recover from them. And so just thank you so much for sharing that so vulnerably and authentically. I know that you're going to have so much value to offer to us, because if so many light bulbs are going off, I'm like, exactly. Yep. Yes. Right. Because these are the things that we do. We pride ourselves on sitting in our hospital bed, mm-hmm. still working. I remember when I was on maternity leave and I'm like, well, I'm still going to work. Yep. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. Or I'm sick. And it's like, it wasn't until I was put in a position to be like, hey, no, if you're sick, you need to take a day off. Mm-hmm. Right. But we think COVID helped with that a little bit. I hope we keep it. But it's like, if we're sick, we should be taking times to recover our body. Our body is speaking to us and mm-hmm. telling us something is wrong. Yeah. And it shouldn't be a time for us as leaders to try to push people. But that's where it comes to being one of those heart-centered leaders. Mm-hmm. That's like, yes, we have a business to run and to be healthy to run the business. And that's something it seems like the company you were working for wasn't exactly identifying. And I think a lot of times we don't associate the two problems together. Do you see that? It's like, oh, I'm sick, but that has nothing to do with my job.
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely separate. And I think, a lot of times, and I'll probably come back to the kind of COVID thing in a moment, but I think we also, particularly when we get into high stress situations and when we are in environments that cause us to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, a lot of the time what I see happening is we have this disconnect. It's like we separate, I suppose, our kind of head, heart and souls really from our body. It's like my body is sick, but the rest of me is okay, right? The body may need to rest, but the rest of me is going to keep on going. The body may need this, but the rest of me can keep on going. And as long as I can stay mentally strong, even if I can't get out of bed, I can still type on my laptop, right? So clearly I can still work. My body may not be working, but the rest of me's fine. And it's almost like we really, really do create this disconnect for ourselves. And I experience that with my own burnout. I see that in literally every single person that I work with when it comes to burnout recovery. It's like we've kind of taken ourselves out of our bodies so we can just keep on going, and we need to bring that connection and make it whole again. And I think to your point there about COVID, it's I find this a really weird one, because I think what I also saw a lot of, burnout has definitely been increasing since 2020. The burnout rates have been increasing hugely since 2020. The burnout gender gap has more than doubled since 2019. And again, I think if we look at a lot of the statistics, where there were a lot of women still doing a lot of the kind of invisible housework, invisible office work throughout that period, particularly whilst they were still continuing to work. But I think interestingly on the health side of things, I don't know if you see this over in the States, but I'm definitely seeing it a lot over here in the UK. It's even if I can be really ill and I can be really run down, but if I do a COVID test and the test says I'm negative, then actually I'm fine. Right. I can feel like I'm really ill, but it's all of a sudden, like, it's as though like no other illness or ailment exists after COVID. Right. And if it's not COVID, then I must be okay to carry on. And I'm seeing this with so many people. And it's like, you are allowed to be run down, right? You're allowed to be run down. You're allowed to take a break. You're allowed to be exhausted. You are allowed to be ill and allow yourself to rest as a result of it. But it's almost like if we haven't got that tick in the box that says, well, it's COVID, there, it's like, well, I can't be ill then. Right. Clearly, if it's not COVID, I'm okay. And I think that is a mentality that we need to shift really, really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do see it. Now that you were saying that, I know we both have children. I'm even thinking, like, do we teach our kids this whenever they're going to school? Mm-hmm. Because if they don't have the fever, if they're not, I want to say this eloquently for the listeners that may be sensitive, but, if things are not staying down, yes. There's certain things that it's like, hey, stay home. But I think sometimes even as a parent, we're encouraging our kids, well, you can get through today. And even just kind of reflecting on that, maybe the Holy Spirit's talking to me saying, you know what, maybe they could just stay home. Maybe they do need a mental health day or a day. And how do we find that balance to not always push? Yeah. Because yes, it definitely exists out there. And it's unique because I've worked in the restaurant industry. I've worked in wellness and I saw it, right? But who really wants someone coming to work when they're sick? Mm-hmm. Working at a restaurant.
Yep.
You shouldn't want any illness in a restaurant. And still it was encouraged to go to work. And I had great employers. I loved so many of the people I worked with. And, those were my youngest years of leading. So I didn't know any better. But I even remember one time I had this, he's a great mentor. I still consider him a friend. And he was trying to really help me. But one day I had like a terrible headache. And I remember him saying, well, you really should try not to leave. You really should try to stay and work through it. And at that point in my life, I had migraines and I wouldn't know it at the time, but I actually had a gluten allergy that was never diagnosed.
Oh, wow.
So my body was constantly being poisoned every day. So migraines were something that was really normal for me at the time. I don't get them anymore since I got off the gluten, but I wouldn't know this. But here I am with this excruciating headache and this guy who's genuinely helping me advance in my career, genuinely, like I love him, is like, you should stay because of this. And I always just saw that as a mentor moment. But now looking at that, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at what we do.
Yeah. And we really do push through it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can remember when my son started school, there were awards given, there still are. Right. I mean, my sons are in their 20s now, but for my youngest stepson, there are awards given in school if you have a full year with no sickness absence. And I can remember when I started in my career I look at this now, and I worked in HR, right? So in some ways I was responsible for policing this rubbish that I now kind of talk about. But in pretty much every organization that I worked in, you would get one full day of additional annual leave, so additional vacation time, if you had one full year with no sickness absence. And I used to struggle in thinking, I get an extra day's leave, right? I get one whole day's extra paid leave. I was also eligible for full sick pay. So if I wasn't feeling well and needed the break, I should have been taking the sick pay. But I forfeit all of that and carried on regardless. I mean, I had maybe 9 years of no sickness absence. And in every organization, I was doing that to get my one extra day of paid leave when I was entitled to sick pay. Like, I was struggling through pain. I was struggling through stomach bugs, like you said, migraines, illnesses, all of that. But I never, ever took a day off sick. And I honestly used to wear that like a badge of honor.
Yeah, I could totally relate. I was the same way. I'm like, badge of honor, and we didn't even get an extra day. Yeah. I did it for pride or ego, or right? I don't know. Yeah. Here, whatever it was. Yes, but it is this badge. You're like, yeah, I can do this. Okay. Well, I am so happy we're having this conversation today, because if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, that is me, or maybe it's just somebody else, right? It's this is where we need to go to probably next, Kelly, to really talk about, what changed for you. Because we know we have these two experiences, because we want to really talk about this. But before we move on to what changed for you, you, I just want to make sure we kind of identify it, because you mentioned it, and I know a lot of people might not be familiar with this, but what is the gender burnout gap? What does that mean?
So the gender burnout gap basically is a statistic, I suppose, if we were to look at the gender pay gap. So the gender burnout gap is really the gender statistics that say how many men versus women are experiencing burnout. So the gap that we had there pre-COVID, kind of 2019, the stats were pretty much equal. I say pretty much equal. They've always been more women than men that have been experiencing burnout. But I suppose what we don't always know from the statistics is some of this, because men aren't talking about it. I mean, if I'm honest, this year is the first year that I have had a number of men approach me to say, I think I'm at burnout. And a lot of my colleagues are also having conversations with men who are saying, I am at burnout. And I've never seen the mass of men talking about it as I have done this year already. And we're 6 or 7 weeks into the year. So it could be that this gap has occurred because men just weren't talking about it. But as we kind of came into 2020 and beyond, the ratio of women that were experiencing burnout more than men had more than doubled.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think that is true, right? We can only get the best statistics and the best data we can give based off of the information that we have. And whether, we're going to talk about women because that's what our show talks about. And so that's what we're talking about here. But I absolutely agree, right? The same way men struggle to get promotions, women struggle to get promotions. There's a lot of the same struggles out there, but it's how you talk about it. And, even this is interesting. I have a son who's 7 years old, and we had another little friend over, one of his little friends over, and we were having this experience, and it came to a point where the one friend was like, we were out at an event, and he's like, oh, I don't really want to come back to your house. And my son was obviously not happy about this. He was emotional. He had little tears in his eyes. He was like, couldn't figure out, why would his friend not want to come back to his house, right? And the kid could be tired. He could be all of these things. And he is a sweet boy. I love this little boy. I love him. And, but at the same time, I could see when he was emotional, how it affected the other little boy. He was like, he's sad, right? So he identified, yes, he's sad. I'm like, it's okay that he's sad. He'll be able to get over that. But I also could see whenever someone realizes, and this little boy is so sweet. I love him. But you could see how he could understand, if I say these things, I can make him feel this way. Yeah. And so, and this happened a couple of times, and they're good friends. So I'm definitely not talking badly about this little boy, but I could just see how here I am trying to be my child's parent and almost want to tell him, like, don't show the emotion. It's almost the conversation I want to have. And I'm like talking to my husband. I'm like, I don't know how to have this conversation. How do we teach this? Because I don't want to teach my little boy not to have emotions, not to have feelings. But I can see that not that the other child is trying to do this, because he's also they're 7-year-old boys. They don't really quite understand all the mechanics, but how he could be manipulated because of his emotions. Yeah. So almost at this young age, teaching them, don't have these feelings because or don't show these feelings to certain people. And I think that's something that's hard, because how do you teach kids about safe people? That's a whole nother conversation. But absolutely. I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's hard from such a young age, because men do operate in different ways. When I see little girls, because I'm always observing children working with gender people, it's really interesting, because whenever the one little girl's hurt or upset, it's a whole different situation. They come over, they apologize, they address it. The feelings never have to be stuffed. The feelings are validated almost. But with boys, it's just so I just wanted to bring that up.
And that's it's a really interesting point. But I think it also, if we look at the flip of that, I think as women get into the workplace, we're basically told, aren't we, do not show any emotion, right? Women are too emotional, over emotional. You're there and you think, I'm just showing emotion. Whereas actually men can show exactly the same emotion and be labeled as a really strong leader for showing that. Whereas Kelly's really emotional, Mary's really emotional, like there must be a reason for it. And it may be useful, it may not be, but I'm recently doing a program at the moment, and there is a fabulous woman that I've just come across called Dr. Shafali, who you and your listeners may already be aware of, but she's doing some amazing stuff on kind of what we need to do to heal ourselves as parents, how to parent our own inner child, and how if we can parent our own inner child, that can help us to be better parents. And I'm kind of 22 years too late for that, but I'm gonna read her latest book and see what I can learn about myself to allow me to be a better parent for my sons and my bonus sons. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, well, that's all we can do as parents. You got to give yourself grace. You got to know what's the intention in your heart, and you really do. Whenever these friend situations come up, you want them to work it out, and you care about both of the kids, and so it's always a hard situation.
I hope he's okay. Did you ever find out why his friend didn't want to come back to the house?
Well, it's interesting, and to not tell too much of the story to give away the person. He ended up coming over to the house.
Okay.
And there's something else shifted because there was another friend that was going to come over to the house. And when another friend was going to be coming over to the house, it was like, oh, and they're young boys, and he was tired. He thought he was tired. So it was totally like he was tired, and but more than the situation, because, we have to be able to understand somebody doesn't want to come over. It's okay to have a hurt emotion. But what was interesting is just seeing like how the emotions affected the relationship. That was the thing that I was kind of like identifying with, and just saying like, oh my gosh, how this is different for boys than it is for girls. As a little girl, you don't have to hide these emotions, because the other person at that age is not acting in that way. They're not like, okay, let me say this because I can get this rise out of this person. I don't see that happening. And my son, he is very, very much a leader. He's very direct. Yeah. He wants to make the rules to the games. He wants to set what they play. Like so when he doesn't get to do that, it's like, hey, I want to do this thing. And so it can be challenging because you've also got his personality in there. And so it's really just figuring out, hey, how do we parent them so they can grow up to be healthy adults and have those emotions so they're not stuffed down or feeling like they've got to hide them away. But just realizing that if we're not careful, it can be really easy to just be like, because my first reaction was, hey buddy, don't act that way. Just don't even act like it bothers you. Like it's allowed to bother you, but don't act like it does, because when it doesn't bother you, it's sometimes not as big of a deal to the other person, it's also just felt like in my heart, I'm like, no, that's not really the right way. So anyways, as we continue on this conversation, I want to hear more about you. We've got you here today, Kelly. So help me understand, like, what has changed for you?
Everything, really. I think a lot of it started with, as I said, I think I'd gone on this journey of trying to really get back to myself. So really understanding, like, who am I, right? Who am I? Who am I not? Who am I feeling like I have to be? Who am I hiding? Which parts of me am I hiding? Which parts of me do I need to bring to the forefront more? And in exploring all of that brought up lots of questions about the type of work that I was doing, the organizations that I was working with, the clients that I was working with, the relationships that I was in, the friendships that I was, kind of the friends that I was spending my time with, the family members that I was either, not spending enough time with or potentially spending too much time with, the house that I was living in, what I was, all of the stuff that I was consuming, right? The TV that I was consuming, the clothes, the handbags, the mass expenditure on thousands of pounds worth of stuff in my wardrobe, the cars that I was driving, the holidays that I was booking. It really, really caused me to look at every single thing in my life and really understand, like, is this aligned to who I really am? Or is this there because of a status or a role or trying to present something to the outside world that's different? So it really caused all of that inward looking, lots and lots of changes. My husband and I separated. I moved into a different house. I started a new relationship. I started working with different clients. I started working on different projects. I made changes within my business, made changes to my hair, my lifestyle, my friendships, the clothes that I would wear, the shops that I would shop in, the types of exercise that I was doing. Like, literally there's nothing that went kind of unturned. And I just started to implement a lot of boundaries to ensure that the boundaries were there to allow me to protect my own energy, recognizing that when I am full, I have more to give to other people. I can create more change. I can be more loving. I can be more kind. I can do more voluntary work. I can, commit to more of my daily practices. I can commit more to myself. I can, commit more to my higher purpose and all of those kind of things. And doing all of those things but still coming back to, really just allowing the time and space. If something no longer feels right, knowing that I don't have to hold on to it anymore, or questioning, why am I trying to hold on to that? Why am I afraid to let that go? And just, continuing to get to myself. And I don't think, I'm not going to say I'm fully there. I think every time, you kind of peel back a layer and get to the point of, oh, okay, this is me. Okay. Like, it's really lovely to meet you. And then something else happens or something else changes. And I feel like I've got a different part of me to discover or a different part of me to let go of. I'm still unlearning some of the behaviors that I was still really attached to in corporate. And sometimes something will come up and I think, oh, where's that come from? Is that true? Is that real? Does that relate to me? And so it's definitely an endless circle, but I think I'm just more aware of the boundaries that I have in place with everything, the time that I take to connect to myself. And then that is having a kind of ripple effect on everything else in my life. So there's literally, I genuinely can't say that anything has stayed the same.
I love that because, it's like we can feel like we're supposed to fit in this mold. Mm-hmm. And so we spend so much of our lives. And you see this with, and I think it's changing. I think it's changing for some of the younger generations in some ways. I really do think it's changing. And you see more of this individuality, which I think is good. Mm-hmm. I think it's good for people to be who they are, because for so long we're taught to kind of fit in and do the thing. And it still happens. I know I mentioned my young son a lot, but it's so interesting to me to see someone at such a young age. Even like Valentine's Day was just here. This kid literally would not take his Valentine's. He had sidewalk chalk, so it was heavy. 19 kids in his class, a big pack of sidewalk chalk mm-hmm. for each child. And, I had Walgreens clearance special, 20 cents a box. So don't think I'm like some kind of super mama over here. We bought it in the summer and it's been sitting up in the cupboard this whole time. Attach a Valentine, it's in the door. But like, okay, we got to get this in. You're going to have to take it in 2 days. We put it in his Lightning McQueen little roller bag. Mm-hmm. He would not take that suitcase out of the car. He's like, I will not take it. I'm not taking it. Nobody else is bringing their Valentines in today. I will be the only one. I will take them all tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you haven't even tried to carry them all. And now you have 2 books from the library in your backpack. And he's a strong boy, but still this chalk is heavy. I'm like, okay, well, I guess you're going to have to figure this out. But just seeing that response of, I don't want to do this because nobody else will. Mm-hmm. And if we're not careful, this is what we learn from society is you do want to be liked, right? You want the kids to play with you. You don't want to mess up. You like certainty. So how, okay, so you're changing, you're having this burnout. How did you give yourself the permission to change?
It was more a case of, can I afford not to? I think that's ultimately where it came to, right? The longer term impact or the bigger risk, I suppose, of continuing to stay as I was. Like my questioning, and I still answer myself this. I still ask myself this question every year now. But if nothing were to change a year from now, how would I feel? And in sitting with that question, like the thought of going through a third burnout, the thought of continuing to feel the way that I was feeling, there's just the thought of all of those things became so much that I just knew that something had to change. And I think in putting that out there, that's where that instinctive, intuitive knowing that I needed to go inward, that's really where that came from. Because as I said, after kind of burnout 1, I'd gone externally looking for everything, right? There probably wasn't a coach or teacher that I hadn't worked with. There wasn't a course that I wasn't doing. There wasn't a book that I hadn't read. There was literally nothing that, like, no stone unturned and give me more information, give me more knowledge, give me more skills, give me more courses, give me more qualifications and accreditations, right? Give me more of all of that stuff, because then I can go and help other people. Whereas actually all of the answers were in me and in identifying that I cannot carry on like this, what needs to change, that's where it would, like, you can't afford not to do this work. Like, it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, but if you don't do it, burnout number 3 is probably around the corner, or worse, right? You may not be here. My first burnout made me critically ill. My second quite literally killed me. And so I may not have still been here if I hadn't made the changes.
Yeah. So what is the most common cause of burnout in women?
Toxic workplaces is still the number 1 cause of burnout in the world. But again, I think linked to that, and I did touch on this earlier, I think it is the fact that we lose our sense of self. We become so worried about what other people are thinking, right? The perception of, are we being too bitchy, too catty, too strong, right? Every time somebody says to us, like, Mary, you're too fill in the blank, right? How many times have we, all of women, been told that you're too something, right? Too bossy, too curious, too nosy, too strong, too feminine, too emotional, too whatever it is it might be. And when we hear that, it's like, oh, okay, so I've now got to be less of myself. Right? I need to be less of myself. I need to be less of myself. And particularly, I had started to be told these things the moment I started in the corporate workplace. And so as a very young leader and a very young manager, to be told, like, we love your passion, but we'd just like a little less of it. We love your curiosity, but we'd like a little less. We love your energy, but could we just have a little bit less of it? We love the fact that you're performing at such a high level, but actually you're making everybody else look bad. So could you slow it down a little bit? Like, all of those adaptations that I was making me less than I was. So when I then ended up in this toxic workplace, I think it was almost that reduction of myself that had then made me think I have to then adjust my behavior to try and fit into this toxic workplace that ultimately caused my burnout. But if I had stayed true to myself, and I've spoken to many people who have been very close to burnout, but they've left the organization after, say, 4 or 6 months because they knew it wasn't right for them. I stayed there for 2 years. And I think I did that because over the years in the lead up to that, I was becoming less of myself. And then I felt I had to fit and modify. Whereas I think if I'd been my whole self in that toxic organization, do you know what? I probably would have walked out on day 1 when that gut feel was telling me, Kelly, you need to get out of here. Because I genuinely think I would have been tuned in enough to say, yes, this is not feeling right. This is not healthy. This is not where I need to be. And yes, it's day 1, but do you know what? I'm worth more than having this feeling continue. That's my absolute belief. And I think every person, every woman that I work with, the biggest disconnect is I feel lost. I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am post burnout. I didn't recognize who I was when I got to burnout. And I think if we can be our whole complete self, we can eliminate that burnout, right? And I think as we said, I made all of those changes after burnout, but imagine the power if I had got to that point of knowing deeply who I was without having to go through the illness and the health conditions and the hospital stays and all of those things. If I had just known that this is who I am and embraced all of that power and all of that strength without burnout, like, it could have been a world changer already.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many things are coming up with what you're saying here because, God has created us. He's created us with the gifts. He's created us with our personalities. And it's not that we can't learn, evolve. And I know there's things over the years that I've changed for the better. And so I always just try to evaluate like, where is this coming from? And my best friend and I were just having a conversation and we're really just, other people's perceptions. And my pastor just touched on this at church. It's like, there is one truth. Mm-hmm. There is one truth. And we've created a world where it's like everybody gets to have their own truth and everybody gets to be offended and everybody gets to think. And it's like, no, you get to be who you are. If you are not outright having negative emotions and intentions, and if you're not just being outright nasty, and it's not to say that we can't learn. Sometimes people will tell us things and their actions will tell us things. Like if you've got an employee that is freezing on everything, they can't take any step, you've got to get to the bottom of it. And sometimes it is because you're being an impossible leader to, meet the expectations of, and you've set expectations so high, and there's things that we can learn and there's ways that we can grow. But at the same time, I truly believe what you're saying. We need to be who we are because we spend all this energy trying to be someone who we're not, someone that God didn't create us to be. we're not honoring God. And we're going into this burnout stage. And I can see where I've done that in some areas of my life. So Kelly, can you share with us, I just want to have some actionable takeaways, 3 things that women can do today to start to regain control of their busy lives and avoid burnout?
Absolutely. Number 1 has to be start to get clear on who you are, and you can just literally sit with it, be it a journal, sit and have the conversation with friends, write it out, talk it into your phone, do whatever it is that you want to do, but start to answer the question, who am I? And just keep going with that question. So start to get some clarity around that. As you start to get the clarity on who you are, you will be guided and supported in terms of wanting to set some of those boundaries in place. Set the boundaries, and they will be values-led, core-led, absolutely wholly aligned boundaries that you can put in. And again, often when I speak to women about boundaries, what I often hear is, I'm just really rubbish at saying no to people. I want you to reframe boundaries, right? Boundaries are how you regain your power, right? It's not just about saying no. When you set a boundary, you are regaining control of your own power, of your own inner strength. So those boundaries are vitally important. And once you move towards that clarity of who am I, and you've started to implement some of those boundaries, ensure that you are creating time for yourself in your busy life every single day, every single week, whether it is 5 minutes with a morning coffee or 5 minutes sat outside with your feet on the ground, whether it's an hour-long soak in a gorgeous bubble bath or, a gorgeous walk. Time to reflect, time to journal. Start to create that time for yourself, because the more breaks that you can take, the more that you can connect to yourself, the more productive, the more positive, the more successful you will be, the more you will continue to connect with yourself, and the further you step away from burnout. So yeah, who are you? What boundaries do you need to implement? And what time can you create for yourself each week?
So Kelly, that was so great. So many great tips. Help us just understand a little bit. Why don't women prioritize themselves?
I think we are trained, conditioned, nurtured, brought up. We are told from the time that we're born, right, that we are the nurturers, we are the givers, we are the ones that have to be there for other people. We are the matriarchs, the mothers, the sisters, the caregivers, the nurses, all of those things. And we can be all of those things. And we have to understand that we need to give to ourselves first. Again, a lot of the things that I see when it comes to burnout is actually what we're doing is we're stealing energy from tomorrow to get us through today. And the more that we do that, the less we have to get, we literally have nothing left in the tank. And we can still be the givers, the nurturers, the everything that we want to be or that we've been told we should be, but we have to put ourselves first. And it's that cliche, isn't it? You've got to put your own oxygen mask on first. That's absolutely what needs to happen. And society may say to us that we have to be the soul nurturers and givers and mothers and matriarchs and all of that stuff. And I believe we have to do all of those things for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually covered this on just a recent podcast with Rachel Elmore. We were talking about how we have to set these boundaries. We have to take this time for ourselves. That rest is really important. And we really just need to pick the things that are meaningful to us, because society has just created it where, you're supposed to be perfect in all of these ways. If you get onto Pinterest or social media, you're supposed to be the perfect chef, and your hair's supposed to look perfect, and you're supposed to dress perfect, and your house should be, perfectly staged, and your yard should be perfectly landscaped, and your car should be perfectly cleaned, and your hair should be perfectly, your nails, every little thing and I love what you just said earlier, where you said you changed, you became who you truly were. And I think that is where true freedom is found, is when we just say we will be who we are, and we act like who we are, because, it can be scary. It can be like, well, if this is what they want, I'm not acting in this way. And I think that's where our faith and our trust just has to come in, because if we are being who God created us to be, then He will make our plans work out the way that they're supposed to. And we don't have to worry. He can change hearts. He can open doors. He can close doors. He can change minds. He can change all of the things. And so all we have to do is honor Him with our lives. And if we are honoring Him, then that is not putting ourselves down. That is not running ourselves ragged, because He tells us to have a Sabbath. We should be having a day of rest every single week. And if we cannot figure out how to fit that rest in, that tells us we have put way too much on our plates. And maybe we need to ask for help. We need to use those 3 methods that you told us. But I just feel like you've given us so much hope today, Kelly, so many useful tips. But I know that you have so much more. You have an amazing book Do you want to share with the audience the book that you've written and where they can find it?
Yes. So you can access it either via my website, so kellyswingler.com, or over on Amazon. It is Mind the Gap, a story of burnout, breakthrough, and beyond. I will say that if you are doing it via Amazon, this is the joy of everybody becoming an author now. There is a second book that's about that's called Mind the Gap, that has nothing to do with burnout and is actually a lot to do with women's sexual health. So yes, it's called Mind the Gap. It's on Amazon, or you can get it over at kellyswingler.com. But please do check, the book is by myself, Kelly Swingler. If you Google Mind the Gap, you may find there is a second book with the same name and the same colour cover, but it's actually about women's sexual health. And that may be something that is of interest, but mine's actually about burnout. So it's Kelly Swingler, Mind the Gap, a story of burnout, breakthrough, and beyond.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for that. And we will put the link in the show notes. So you guys will have that. You'll be able to get directly linked over there for that. Kelly, as we wrap up today, would you just share with us who the most influential woman mentor has been in your life and why?
Oh, so many, but I've been really blessed, really, I think, with the amount of incredible women that I have had in my life. I think the one that I probably will give most credit to, I think, has to actually be my mum. I think when I was born, I'm the eldest of three siblings, and my mum wanted to continue working, wanted to continue her career. My dad actually became the stay-at-home husband. This was in the 80s, which was completely unheard of. We were seen as a very kind of weird family, but I think my mum has been able to really just kind of, again, show me that whatever you want to do is possible. She'd lost both of her parents by the time she was in her early 30s. And I think to have been able to keep going through that, to bring up three children, to have such an amazing career and just continue to believe in herself and believe in her family and support me and my brother and my sister and my dad in everything that we've wanted to do, and having to overcome as many health challenges as she had. I think, I think she's the woman that has really shown me that anything is possible, as long as we believe in ourselves and we keep on going, and that we have a belief in something that is bigger and greater than us, then we can achieve anything. So I'm going to give that shout out today to my mom.
I love that. And it's so encouraging because so many people pick their mom. And I think sometimes when we're in the momming moments, we're like, oh my gosh, are we getting it right? Are we doing enough? And it's just, when I hear mom, it actually just warms my heart so much, because even when we feel like we're being imperfect, we are giving our children so much. And I think they can't always see it in the moment, but as we grow up and as we develop, we realize, oh my gosh, how much did they really give us? And so thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for being an incredible guest on the show today. Definitely go out, get her book, stay in touch with her, connect with her on social media. We'll put all the links in the show notes for you to make that easy. And until we meet again, remember, you're only one plan away from your next promotion, and God, He's not done with you.
Hey friend, thank you for listening today. Be sure to join us next week for another great episode. If you receive value from today's show, I'd appreciate it if you would leave us a 5-star review to help others learn about the show. And if you're ready to fast track your career and increase your income, impact, and joy, then head on over to maryjervich.com and check out the masterclass that teaches you how you can advance too. I'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. This and so much more can be found in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you soon.